So this is our final talk in this series on emptiness, the wisdom of emptiness. But hopefully it won't be our final look at emptiness, because we do need to put a lot of time and effort into learning about emptiness, listening to teachings, reading, studying, meditating, discussing, to be able to really understand it. So it's a long-term project, but we're really, really fortunate that we do have the chance to learn about it, because this is like the ultimate medicine, cure for all of our suffering and causes of suffering, especially ignorance. So we'll start as usual by reciting the Heart Sutra, and then a few other prayers to bring positive thoughts into our mind. Is our reason, our motivation for coming together for this class. Thus have I heard, at one time the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha on Masked Vulture's Mountain, together in one method with a great assembly of monastics and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the concentration of the countless aspects of phenomena called profound illumination. At that time also, the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, was looking perfectly at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, perfectly looking at the emptiness of inherent existence of the five aggregates also. And then, through the power of Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, how should a child of the lineage train who wishes to engage in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, replied to Venerable Shariputra as follows. Shariputra, whatever son or daughter of the lineage wishes to engage in the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look perfectly like this, subsequently looking perfectly and correctly at the emptiness of inherent existence of the five aggregates also. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. Likewise, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are merely empty, having no characteristics. They are not produced and do not cease. They have no defilement and no separation from defilement. They have no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. There is no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no form, no sound, no smell, no taste, no tactile object, no phenomenon. And there is no I element, and so forth, up to no mind element, and also up to no element of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance, and so forth, up to no aging and death, and no exhaustion of aging and death. Likewise, there is no suffering, origin, cessation, or path, no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide in the perfection of wisdom. Their minds have no obstructions and no fear, passing utterly beyond perversity. They attain the final state beyond sorrow. Also, all the Buddhas who perfectly reside in the three times, relying on the perfection of wisdom, become manifest and complete Buddhas in the state of unsurpassed, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the equal to the unequaled mantra, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, since it is not false, should be known as the truth. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Tayata gate gate paragate parasam gate bodhisoha. Shariputra, a bodhisattva, a great being, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like this. Then the Blessed One arose from that concentration and said to Superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, that he had spoken well. Good, good, O child of the lineage, it is like that. And since it is like that, just as you have revealed, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced in that way, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Shariputra, the Superior Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva, the great being, and that entire assembly of disciples, as well as the worldly beings, gods, humans, demigods, and spirits, were delighted and highly praised what had been spoken by the Blessed One. Okay, so while reciting these prayers, you might like to imagine the Buddha in front of you, many other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas surrounding him. So that can make our recitation of the prayers more genuine, more heartfelt, if we really think of the Buddha and his followers, the Bodhisattvas, and the Dharma is mainly the realizations in their mind, especially wisdom, realizing the true nature of things, but all the other positive qualities that they have as well. And if you wish, you can imagine all other beings around yourself, and they're all taking refuge along with you and getting the benefit of reciting these prayers along with you. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn, this ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Ratna Mandala Kamneyatayami. Now, while we recite the mantra of the Buddha, imagine light flowing from the Buddha and all the other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas into oneself and all other living beings. The light purifies our suffering, like sickness, other kinds of physical problems, emotional problems, and the very causes of suffering, the afflictive states of mind we're not free of. So especially ignorance and greed and hatred, the three poisonous states of mind. So imagine these getting purified, vanishing, becoming non-existent. And our positive potential, the seeds of universal love, compassion, and so on, and wisdom, that we have the potential to develop these, to attain these. So imagine those seeds getting nourished so that they can grow more and more, and eventually we have these positive qualities in a perfected way. Tayata Om Mani Mani Maha Manaye Soha. 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 So now really try to ensure that your state of mind, your motivation for being here and joining this class is an altruistic one. If you're comfortable with the idea of attaining enlightenment, becoming just like the Buddha, then you can bring that into your mind. Think of that as your ultimate goal, your long-term goal. I want to become a Buddha to help all living beings. And that's why I'm here listening to this talk. If you're not fully familiar and comfortable with the idea of attaining enlightenment, that's understandable. It usually takes a while to think about that and get comfortable with it. But try to at least have some kind of altruistic intention, such as I'm here to learn things that will help me to be more helpful to others, not harm others, but help them as much as I can. So that's another possible motivation that you might have. So try to have at least some kind of motivation of wanting to do good, wanting to be helpful to others and to the world, and not, of course, yourself. We need to help ourselves, but it's good to try to expand our awareness and include others in our wish to give benefit. Okay, so at the end of last week's class, I explained the 4-point analysis, which is one method for developing an understanding of emptiness with regard to our own self, I, me. Although it can be used for other things as well that we're trying to understand the emptiness of. So I explained it last week, and I thought we'll do a meditation on this today, starting at the start of the class. So it's important to understand that emptiness, which is what we're trying to learn about, trying to understand, is a kind of phenomena that can't be seen with any of our senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. So our 5 senses are not able to perceive emptiness. It's not that kind of phenomena. And in fact, in Buddhist philosophy, one way of dividing up things that exist is into three types of phenomena. One is called manifest or obvious phenomena. And those are all the things that we can perceive with our senses, like people and buildings and trees and statues and flowers and so on. So all of the physical things, the material things are that type of phenomena because we can just directly perceive them as long as our senses are working properly. But then a second type of phenomena is called hidden phenomena, is the usual term. And that includes things that are not perceivable by our senses. So our 5 senses cannot perceive them. And instead, what we need is the mental consciousness, the 6th sense. And in order for our mental consciousness to understand these phenomena, we have to use a reason. We have to use some kind of process of reasoning or just a reason. And a simple example of that, because we do have experiences of this just in our daily life. Right now it's winter time, and in some places it's quite cold, and some houses have a furnace or a wood burning stove in their house. And when you see smoke coming out of the chimney of that house, then you can understand that they have a fire in their fireplace, in their wood burning stove. So the fire itself isn't something that can be seen because we're outside of the house and the fire is inside the house and inside the fireplace. So we can't actually see the fire directly with our eyes, but by the presence of smoke coming out of the chimney, we can infer that there's a fire. They have lit a fire in their fireplace. Okay, so in that particular instance, the fire is a hidden phenomena. It's hidden from our senses. I mean, normally fire is a manifest phenomena. If it's right in front of us, we can directly see it. But in that situation, we're not able to actually directly see the fire, but we can infer. This is using our 6th sense, our mental consciousness, and specifically conceptual mind. It's thought or conception that is able to see the smoke and then understand, where there's smoke, there's fire. So there must be a fire in their fireplace. Okay, so there's lots of cases like that where there may be an object that we can't directly perceive, but we can still know it or understand it by using a sign. So the smoke, in that case, the smoke is a sign of the presence of fire. So emptiness is that type of phenomena. Emptiness is a hidden phenomena. It's not directly perceivable, but it is possible to understand emptiness first with a conceptual mind, which is one of our an aspect of our sixth consciousness, the mental consciousness. So by using a sign, and they actually do use the term sign in Buddhist philosophy, or reason, using a sign or a reason, we can get an understanding of emptiness. And first, that understanding will be conceptual understanding. But once we have a conceptual understanding and we continue meditating on that, getting more and more familiar with it in meditation, but also we need to develop very good concentration. We need to have kamabhati. And so putting those two together, conceptual understanding of emptiness and kamabhati, combining those two, eventually we can attain a direct perception of emptiness. And this direct perception is not any of our five senses, but it's the sixth sense. So it's a mental direct perception of emptiness. And that's the thing that we really need in order to eliminate our afflictions, our ignorance and attachment and anger and so on, all the various disturbing thoughts and emotions running around in our mind. So the antidote to those is the wisdom that directly sees emptiness, directly realizes emptiness. But before we can have that, we need to first develop a conceptual understanding of emptiness by using reasoning. And so that's why there's a number of different reasons that you can use to understand emptiness. Dependent arising is one reason. And this process of the 4-point analysis is another reason, a reasoning process that can be used to get a realization of emptiness. So the starting point of meditating on this is to get in touch with our sense of self, our sense of I, which, whether we know it or not, whether we understand it or not, it appears to be something inherently existing, independently existing, objectively existing, something real and solid and existing on its own, existing from its own side. So that's how our sense of self or I appears. However, that kind of I or self doesn't exist at all. It's completely non-existent. It's like a fantasy. I like the analogy of a mirage. If you've been in the desert and it's a hot day, the sun is up in the sky shining on the surface of the desert, and then there's this appearance of water. You could swear there was a river or a lake over there on the horizon. It really looks like that, but it's not. It's just an appearance of water, but there isn't water there, because if you actually traveled to where there appears to be water, you'll find nothing, just dry sand. So that's a good analogy for what happens with our sense of self or I. It appears to be a real I existing on its own independently, but is that true? This is what we have to investigate. Does our I exist that way or not? And if we do investigate, we get closer and closer and try to find this I. We do it, in a good way. Then it will vanish, just like the appearance of water on the surface of the desert will vanish when we try to find it. When we realize, it's just an appearance because of conditions. In the same way, a real I appears just because of causes and conditions. But anyway, to make this work, we have to first get in touch with our sense of self, our sense of I, the inherently existing I. I'm just going to read something from a book which hasn't yet been published. It will be, it's forthcoming. So it's volume 8 of this series called A Library of Wisdom and Compassion by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Thupten Chodron. So some of you may have seen the earlier volumes of that. I think so far 6 have been published, but 7 and 8 are forthcoming, and both of those volumes are about emptiness. So they really go into quite a lot of detail. So this is from volume 8. And it's about how to identify the object of negation in, the inherently existing I. So it says, to bring up the image or feeling of an inherently existent I, the masters suggest remembering an emotionally charged situation. For example, when you were wrongly accused. For example, someone shouts, "You ruined this event." Suddenly, the thought roars in our mind, "I didn't do that. Don't blame me." So when that kind of thing happens, if we're actually in a situation like that, we probably wouldn't have the presence of mind to be able to look for that I that seems to be so real and solid. But later, afterwards, when our mind is more calm, or in a calm situation, we can try to remember that experience. And then it says, then, while one part of your mind holds that feeling, with a corner of your mind, examine how the self appears at that moment. Does this I that you cherish seem solid? How are you apprehending it? Do you doubt its existence at all? Or are you 100% sure that this real I truly exists? Don't make this a verbal description mimicking a text that describes the object of negation, but rather observe how the I appears to exist. So how does this I appear to exist to your ordinary mind, your ordinary experience? Does the I depend on anything else, or does it appear to exist and operate under its own power? Is it a solid entity existing in its own right? Observing the sense of I, be aware of how the mind innately apprehends the I as inherently existent. Spend as much time as needed to get a sense of what the I would be like if it inherently existed. And then it goes on to say, the sense of I that arises when we are falsely accused is a comparatively coarse object of negation. So sometimes the teachers or the books talk about this kind of situation when we are accused or blamed and we have a strong sense of an I coming up. I didn't do that. And they make it sound like that sense of I is the inherently existent I. But in fact, it's not. It's probably the self-sufficient, substantially existent I, the coarser level of our sense of I. But that's not always clearly explained. However, it's still good to get that sense of an I, because we have to first recognize and deal with that coarser level of I before we can get to the subtler one, the inherently existent I. So we can begin with that, just begin with whatever sense of I we're able to get. Over time, as you become more adept at identifying the various ways you grasp the I and the conceived object of that grasping, you will be able to identify subtler forms of the false I. Eventually, you will be able to identify the subtlest object of negation, which is anything more than what is merely designated by conception. Anything that isn't just designated by conception. That is the object of negation in the meditation on emptiness, emptiness of inherent existence. And here's a description from the fifth Dalai Lama, because the fifth Dalai Lama wrote a text, which I don't think has been translated yet into English, that apparently he gives a very good description of the object of negation and how to identify it. Sometimes the I will seem to exist in the context of the body. Sometimes it will seem to exist in the context of the mind. Sometimes it will seem to exist in the context of feelings, discriminations, or other factors. At the end of noticing a variety of modes of appearance, you will come to identify an I that exists in its own right, that exists inherently, that from the start is self-established, existing undifferentiatedly with the body, with the mind and the body, which are also mixed like milk and water. So this seemingly real, inherently existing I seems to exist on its own from its own side, and yet it still appears mixed with our body and mind, and they also appear to be mixed like milk and water. So that's a kind of description of how this inherently existing I appears. So that's the first step. And we're going to, in the meditation that we do, we'll just do the best that we can to get in touch with our sense of I. And don't be worried if it's really the subtlest wrong conception of the I or not. Just work with whatever sense of I you're able to get. And then we'll go through the other points of the meditation to kind of target that I, investigate. Does it really exist the way it appears or not? Okay, so make yourselves comfortable, but still try to sit up straight, not be lounging, lying down. Otherwise, the mind can become sleepy and dull. Let your mind settle down. If there are any thoughts in your mind that aren't related to the meditation that we're doing, put them aside for now. So it could be helpful to start by spending a few moments paying attention to the breath as it's coming in and going out. That'll help your mind to settle down in the present, the here and now. And now bring to mind an experience where you had some strong emotion It could be like the example of being falsely accused or blamed for something and feeling angry, defensive. Or it could be another kind of experience, maybe fear or anxiety or excitement, kind of happy excitement, like if you were praised or something wonderful happened to you. So remember that experience as clearly as possible and try to get a sense of the I that lies behind or beneath the emotion. So try to keep your mind in that experience of feeling this strong emotion and have one part of your mind, a corner of your mind, looking at that experience itself and trying to recognize how the I appears. Like, does it appear to exist on its own, independent of anything else, autonomous? Does it appear real, like undeniably, irrefutably real, a real thing, rather than something just fabricated by the mind? So if you're having any difficulty with this point, maybe you can't really get a sense of the I, a solid, real, autonomous I, or maybe you get it for a moment and then it disappears. Don't worry about that. We're still just trying it out. And you could also just use the sense of I that you have at this very moment, the I that is sitting in your room or wherever it is you're sitting, doing this meditation. There is a sense of an I existing right here, right now, meditating. So you could also just focus on that sense of I. Because that also probably seems quite real. There is a real I sitting here, listening to this talk and trying to meditate, trying to understand and make sense of all of this. So even at this moment, you might be able to identify or recognize a sense of a real solid I. Okay, so that's the first of the 4 points. The second point is about the pervasion. So the idea here is, if there really is such an I as it appears to be, then there's only 2 possibilities of where it could be found, where it could exist. One possibility is within our aggregates, inherently one, because it appears to be something inherently existing. And so if there really was an inherently existing I, then it would have to be either inherently one with our aggregates, our body and mind, meaning we should be able to find it somewhere within our body and mind. Or the other possibility is somewhere else, separate from, outside of our body and mind, our aggregates. So I gave the analogy of how if you're looking for your neighbor, let's say a man named Bill, and you want to find him and talk to him about something. So you go over and knock on his door, ring his doorbell, call his name. And either he's home or he's not home. Either he's in his house or he's out somewhere else. There's only 2 possibilities. And so if you don't find him at home, then you know he's out somewhere else. And then you go and search for him elsewhere. Or a more pertinent example would be, let's say you have a desk with 2 drawers, and you think your wallet is in one of those 2 drawers. And so you search in one drawer, you open it up and you search for your wallet, you don't find it in that drawer. Then you search the other drawer, and you can't find it in that drawer. So then you conclude your wallet does not exist in that desk. It's not in the desk because you can't find it in either of those 2 drawers. So it's kind of similar here. If we're looking for the I, we're trying to find this inherently existing I, then there are just these 2 places, 2 possibilities. And then we're going to search for the I in those 2 possibilities. See if we can find it there. So just contemplate that and see if it makes sense to you that there are just these 2 possible places where the I could be found, and there's no third possibility. Okay, so the next point, number 3, is checking the first possibility, that is looking for the I within our aggregates, our body and mind. So one way of doing that is to just think about all the different parts of our body and mind, all the different things that make us up, and see if we can point to any of those parts as being this I, this real, solid, inherently existing I. So start with the body. That's easier because we know the different parts of our body. We can see some of the parts of our body, and we've seen drawings or pictures of the other parts of the body that lie inside, like the different organs. Just spend some time thinking about the different parts of your body and ask yourself if any of those parts is that I that gets emotional, upset, or excited, or frightened, or whatever. Now we're going to move on to checking the mind. It's a little harder to understand the parts of the mind. They can't be seen or touched. They're not perceivable by our senses. So we rely on the Buddhist teachings to explain what the mind is and the different parts of the mind. So the mind does have different parts. So one part of the mind are the 6 primary minds or main minds related to our 6 senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling with our body, and then the mental sense, including our thoughts and memories and so on. And so we have these 6 different ways of knowing things, but each one only lasts a moment and then it's gone. These 6 types of mind are not fixed, permanent, always there, but they arise and they pass moment by moment. So just check if you think any of these 6 types of main minds or primary minds could be the I. And again, remember that they're not permanent. They arise and pass. They come and they go, appear and disappear. So is that how you see your sense of I? Does your I exist in that way? And then other parts of the mind are mental factors, of which there are many different types. Some are non-virtuous or disturbing states of mind, like anger, attachment, and so on, all the kleshas, the delusions. So they are mental factors. But also we have virtuous mental factors like faith and compassion and equanimity. And there's some mental factors that are neither virtuous nor non-virtuous, but more like neutral, such as feelings, discriminations. So there's many different mental factors, and these too are transitory, not permanent. They're not permanent, fixed things that are always there, but they arise and pass momentarily. Just ask yourself if your I could be any of the mental factors. So we might find it difficult to pinpoint one part of our body or one part of our mind and say that is the I. And we might think the whole collection of all the different parts of the body and mind. That's me. I'm the collection of all those things. So we need to investigate that idea. So if we go through all the individual parts of our body and all the individual parts of our mind and cannot find one that we can point to as the I, as me, so that means each of those parts is not I, not me. It's not a self. So then does it make sense to say that you could put together a whole bunch of non-I's and say that's an I? That's me, that's myself. That collection, that mass of non-I's. That would be like putting together a whole bunch of oranges and then saying that's an apple. Or gathering a whole bunch of cats in one place and saying that's a dog. So those are obviously impossible, absurd things to do, but it would be similar if you put together a whole bunch of non-I's, things that are not I, not self, and then say that is a self. So these are some of the ways we can investigate the possibility of the I existing within our body and mind. But now we'll move on to the other possibility, which is that it exists outside of our body and mind, somewhere else. So again, we're looking for an inherently existing I, an independently existing I. And if that kind of I were to exist, and if it were separate from or different from our body and mind, it would have to be totally, absolutely separate. And there would be no connection, no relationship, no dependence at all. It would have to be completely independent of our body and mind. Because otherwise, if it was dependent on our body and mind, then it couldn't be an inherently existing, independently existing I. So if there was an inherently independently existing I that existed separate from our body and mind, then we would be able to find it separate from our body and mind. And we could have situations like our body and mind could be in one place. So all the parts of your body, all the parts of your mind could be at home, for example, and your I could go out for a walk, go down to a cafe and have a cup of coffee. So that would be possible because it's totally independent of the body and mind. It doesn't depend at all on the body and mind. Completely separate, completely independent. So obviously that isn't possible. And if you think about the different things that you do, like walking, talking, working, meditating, eating, sleeping, and so on, the various activities or functions that the I does, can any of those be done without the body and mind? Or one or both of the body and mind? So if you are not able to find that I that seemed so real, so undeniably existing, inherently existing, independently existing at the beginning of the meditation, the I that gets upset, angry, frightened, excited, and so on. So if you're not able to find that I in any of the places where we searched, then you might be able to conclude that that kind of I doesn't exist. That's the meaning of emptiness, the emptiness of an I existing inherently, independently on its own. But be careful not to jump to the conclusion that there's no I at all. I don't exist at all, full stop. That would be nihilism. So we do exist. There's an I, a self, that's sitting here now and doing this meditation, and that does other things, working, walking, talking, writing, and so on. And there is an I that follows the spiritual path and eventually attains enlightenment. So that I does exist. But what it is, how it exists, is not inherently independently existing on its own, but it's just what we label, what is labeled or designated to our body and mind, to our aggregates. So the combination of the basis, the aggregates, body and mind, and the label I, or whatever our name is, that fulfills the function of the person that functions. So it can happen that when we try to do a meditation like this, a meditation on emptiness, we may feel confused. That might be because of not fully understanding what we're doing and what it's all about. But it's also because what we're doing is something quite unusual. We are challenging our sense of self, our sense of I, which has been with us our whole life. The time we were first born, or even before that, constantly 24/7, we always have this sense of a real I, a real me. And normally, people normally don't question that, don't challenge that. What is the I? They just, I exist, and I'm doing this and that, and so on. And so our mind has just been living with the assumption that this sense of self or sense of I is something real, something true, something beyond doubt, beyond question. And so when we do this kind of meditation, that's getting shaken. And so it's natural that we may feel confused or uncomfortable. But it's actually a good thing. It's a good kind of confusion, a good kind of discomfort. because it means we are starting to go in the right direction, in the direction of the true nature of things, how things really do exist. And the understanding of how things do exist is medicine. It's like the remedy for all our suffering and causes of suffering. So don't get scared or worried, anxious if you do feel uncomfortable or confused or whatever. It's actually a good sign. If you were to just sit there and not feel anything or be bored, have your mind wandering elsewhere, that's not so good. So if you do feel some discomfort or some confusion, that's probably a sign that you're doing well. You're doing the right thing. And yeah, we need time to study, listen to teachings, improve our knowledge, our understanding of emptiness. But also it's not enough just to learn about emptiness, because emptiness, like I think I mentioned this before, in the monasteries, the monks and nuns spend about 12 years studying more basic aspects of Buddhist philosophy before they start focusing on emptiness. And the other things that they're learning really help them. They're like foundational information, background information that will enable them to understand emptiness. So if we don't do those kind of studies and we just jump right into trying to understand emptiness, that's also a reason why we could feel confused, because we don't have the background. And so it's really good if you have the chance to do more study of Buddhist philosophy. For example, the basic program, which Thupten Norbuling is offering, and the FPMT offers in general. You can do that online from afar. So that it's tough. It's not easy. It's a lot of information and a lot of years of study. But the more you study, I mean, this is definitely my experience, the more I study these other topics, then that helps me understand emptiness. Because there's so many concepts and even just the terminology that are required to really understand what is emptiness and how do we understand emptiness. What kind of mind is it that realizes emptiness? How does that mind arise, and so on? So I encourage you to do those studies if you can. Let's take a break at this point. This is kind of our half point between the in the session. So let's take a 5-minute break and then come back and do a bit more.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you.
See everyone in 5.
Okay, so welcome back. So up until now, we've been looking at one kind of emptiness. At the beginning, I mentioned two main divisions of emptiness or selflessness. One is selflessness of persons, the other is selflessness of phenomena. And so far we've just been looking at the first one, selflessness of persons. And persons include oneself, I, plus other persons. All other living beings are also persons. And so we can also meditate on other persons as being empty of inherent existence. So we can use the same reasoning, the same process that we use for ourselves. We can apply that to other persons as well. For example, trying to recognize how another person, maybe someone we like or someone we dislike or someone we have neutral feelings for, they also appear inherently existing. It seems like there's a real person over there. And so then we can check if that real person does exist. They should be findable. I should be able to find that real person, either within their body and mind or somewhere else outside of their body and mind. So we can use that same process that we just used for ourselves. So then the other type of selflessness is selflessness of phenomena. And here phenomena means anything that's not a person, anything other than a person. And so that includes a body, our bodies, also our minds, and all the material things in the world around us, like houses and cars and telephone poles and computers and phones and statues and food and music. So everything that's not a person. So those are also empty of inherent existence, but we need to investigate that, come to an understanding of that on our own. And so if you could put up whoever's hosting, the file of the original outlines that I sent, because there's just a few points left on that. Yeah, that one. So down bottom of the page. So the second to the last bullet point, because we just did the first under letter E. Yeah, we did the first one, the 4-point analysis. So the next one says, a practical way to use dependent arising is to do a reality check when you're angry or attached to someone. Okay, so this is a practical way of using what we've been learning about, because we sometimes get angry at other people, or milder forms of anger might just be dislike, aversion, irritation, and so on, those kind of feelings. And we also sometimes have attachment. We find another person really fascinating and we want, oh, can you put it back up? Can you put the slide back up? And so when we have attachment for somebody, that can also be problematic. So when we do have some kind of delusion or afflictive emotion in our mind towards another person, then it can be helpful to just think about how that person exists dependently, going through the 3 ways of dependence. The first one is arising from causes and conditions. Okay, so you can think about how that person came into existence, starting off as a little tiny zygote in their mother's womb, so small, can't even be seen with a naked eye. You can only see it under a microscope, and certainly doesn't look like a person, it's just a little blob. So starting from there, and then growing, gradually turning into a little fetus, and then a baby, and then coming out of the womb as this tiny little baby, and completely dependent on nourishment, food and so forth, but also love and care and attention. And just think about the causes and conditions that this person was dependent on in order to come into existence and get to where they are now. So it's very helpful to contemplate that, and go through that whole process. And then the second way of dependent is made of parts. So you can think about all the different parts of the person, the parts of the body, like we did earlier in that meditation, and then the parts of their mind. So they're just kind of a mass, a collection of so many different components. Some are physical, some are mental, and they're changing all the time. All these parts, they're not permanent, fixed, but they're impermanent, just like, shifting sands in a sand dune, always changing. So that can be very helpful to think about as well, kind of mentally take them apart. And the third way is more subtle, more difficult to understand, how they're just labeled. the person's name, maybe the person is named Bill, for example, or Mary. So we tend to think there's a real Bill over there, a real Mary over there. But that's just a name that was given to them, probably by their parents when they first popped out. And it's just an arbitrary name because the parents like that name, or maybe that was somebody's mother's name or father's name. So people have different reasons why they choose names. And so they're just labeled. It's just a label given to that mass of components, physical and mental components that are just changing constantly. But also, what it says here is, for example, another kind of label we put on people isn't just their name, but also the label friend, enemy, and stranger. Yeah. One person is a friend, another person is an enemy, meaning somebody we don't like, we don't feel good towards, and we don't want to be kind to them. And then stranger, people we are indifferent to, don't have any strong feelings. So our mind, not deliberately, but we put these labels onto people, and then we tend to believe they're really like that from their own side. Independently. There's a real independently existing friend, a real independently existing enemy, a real independently existing stranger, as if those labels are permanent, fixed for all of time. But that's also, if we examine that, then we can see, no, depends on our mind, depends on our perspective, our way of thinking. An easy way to understand that is to think that the person we like and regard as a friend, not everybody sees that person as a friend. Some people can't stand them. Some people see them as an enemy. Your friend is somebody else's enemy. And likewise, the enemy, the person we don't like, is for some people wonderful. They think they're great, fantastic. They love them. So we have this tendency to believe these labels we put on people are there in the person from their own side, rather than just something projected by our mind. So this is one of the things we do when we're meditating on equanimity as part of the bodhicitta method for developing bodhicitta. And that's really helpful to loosen those tendencies to think of somebody as a real friend, a real enemy, a real stranger. It really helps to even out our feelings and have more equanimity. So this is just, we don't have time to meditate on it, but this is a very, very helpful practice to do, especially when you are feeling attachment or angry. Just think about these 3 ways that things are dependent. And that, even if it doesn't lead to a realization of emptiness, but it can at least soften your emotion, whatever emotion you have, anger or attachment. It becomes less strong and more soft, helping you have more of an attitude of equanimity. Then the next bullet point is kind of similar, but yeah, another way we can use dependent arising. So this could be used for any kind of object, not just a person, but a car or a type of food or something we find either desirable, an object that we're attached to and we feel I have to have that, I can't live without that, or something we have aversion to, something we find really annoying or irritating. So this is kind of step-by-step process we can use. So the first point is to bring to mind that object. And then the second point, check how it appears to your mind. Does it seem real, existing from its own side, independent of everything else, permanent, like it's just the way it exists now, the way it appears to me now? It's going to be like that forever and ever and ever and will never change. So try to recognize how that object appears to your mind, and then question, is that true? Does it really exist that way? So the third point is, what is it? Like looking for that object, looking for that real, whatever, chocolate or iPhone, whatever it is. What exactly is that object? And you can do like we did before in the meditation. Think about how it's made up of parts, many, many different parts, components. So if you think about all the parts that make it up, can you find any one part that you can point to and say, that is the object? That is it. So that's very helpful. And the fourth question is, does everyone else see the object the same way you do? That's helpful too, just to realize that the object that you find really attractive and fascinating and interesting and desirable, not everybody sees it in the same way. Not everyone gets excited and attached to that object, or in the case of something you find annoying or irritating, driving you crazy, not everybody feels that way. Some people don't even notice it. I've had that experience because I'm really sensitive to noise, sound. And so certain noises I find just kind of drives me crazy. I have to get away from that noise. I have to stop that noise. And I'll mention that to somebody else and they'll say, what noise? Like they don't even notice. Or they might notice it, but it doesn't bother them. So that helps me realize it's got to do with in here and not out there. It's not that noise from its own side, inherently, independently, is annoying. Otherwise it would annoy everybody. But that isn't the case. It doesn't annoy everybody. So there's something about me and my mind that's causing me to see it in that way. And then number 5 says, do you always see it in that way? So that's really helpful as well, to recognize that at different times, you might have different feelings or different reactions to that object, that annoying noise or that incredibly attractive object. There may be times when you feel neutral, not really excited or averse, but just kind of neutral in the middle. So even from your own mind, the way that object appears can change. And then the last point, number 6, says you can also check the I who feels the emotion. So this is like a method you can use to use the idea of emptiness in a practical way when you're having some emotional experience, some afflictive experience of either attachment or aversion. You could use it with other things like jealousy, pride. So it's like a method to deal with afflictive emotions rather than just following them, getting caught up in them, acting them out, and so on. So you can ask yourself these kind of questions, do this kind of analysis. It can be very helpful. And so in addition to checking the object, number 6 is checking the I. So there's this strong sense of an I who has attachment or anger or whatever the emotion is. So what is that I that seems to be there behind the emotion, under the emotion, feeling the emotion? So then you can do an analysis of the I like we did before. Does this I really exist the way it appears? Also, the emotion itself, that's something else you could analyze. The attachment or the anger, that experience, how does that exist? Does that appear to be something real and solid, independently existing, inherently existing? And so and check that. And you can think about the three different ways of dependence, arising from causes and conditions, arising made up of parts, and mental labeling and so on. So these are just some ideas I'm sharing with you about how you can use some of this information that we've been learning about in real life in practical ways, especially when experiencing some emotions. Okay, so then I sent a little short slideshow with some kind of maybe go into more depth with what I was just talking about, giving you the one searching for a car. Yeah, this one. Okay, so this can help make sense of some of those points. This is a fuzzy picture, but the car itself looks pretty good. Brand new, shiny, and an expensive luxury car, Mercedes-Benz. Okay, so when if and when we see a car like this parked out in the street, or in the showroom of a car dealer, or a friend has just come to visit us driving a car like this. So when we see that car, we'll probably go, our eyes will get really big and we'll think, wow, look at that car. It may not be the color you like. You could change the color to one that you like. But anyway, I'm just giving this as an example. When we do see nice, new, shiny, especially expensive luxury kind of car, it's good to try to check how that car appears. How does our mind see the car? Does it appear to be something real, solid, out there, objectively existing, inherently, independently existing? So it probably does appear that way. And we usually don't question the appearance, we just go along with it. And then our mind might get into attachment, desire, even start fantasizing. Oh, I'd like a car like that. If I had a car like that, wow, that would be so wonderful, driving around in that car, looking so cool, taking my friends for a ride. So having these fantasies about the pleasure that, again, an inherently existing I, or real I, would be able to have this inherently existing pleasure with that inherently existing car. So we can check, does the car really exist in that way? Inherently, independently, objectively. So if it did exist, then we should be able to find it. For example, when we look among the parts of the car. So on the next slide, so this isn't quite the same kind of car. It looks like an old Toyota hatchback or something like that. But it's the only one that I could find. Apparently some photographer, Canadian photographer, likes to do this. He likes to take things apart and then photograph them. So this is very helpful. So even a beautiful, expensive Mercedes-Benz is really just a whole bunch of parts. It's just a combination of many, many, many different parts, maybe thousands of parts if you consider all the little screws, the nuts and bolts, the wires, and so on. And you could even take it apart more than this. You could, disassemble the body of the car, the windows, the doors, the trunk, the I forget what you call the front part, but yeah, you could take it, you could take all the parts apart, the seats, the tires, the hubcaps, and so on. So there's many, many, many different parts that go to making up something like a car. And so it's really helpful. And you might, I mean, to just say to ourselves, oh yeah, there's all these parts and none of those parts is the car. But it's helpful to really go part by part, look at each part and ask yourself, is this a car? Is the wheel a car? Is the seat a car? Is the steering wheel a car? Is the window a car? And so on. So really look at each part. I know it might be kind of annoying and time consuming, but it's very helpful to look at each part and determine for yourself that it's not a car. Don't just dismiss it and say, oh yeah, and none of these parts is the car, but really think about that. None of these parts is a car. So where is that seemingly real, objectively existing, inherently existing car that seemed to be there when we saw the car with all the parts put together? It seemed like there was an inherently existing car. And we can get attached to it and have fantasies about it. But when we look for it, we try to find it, then difficult. Okay, so then the next slide kind of gives some more ways of thinking, more ways of checking. So this is similar to the 4-point analysis that we did with our I, the sense of self, sense of I. And if it exists, if an inherently existing car does exist, then there's only a few possibilities. One is it's inherently one with its parts. And if that was the case, then I mentioned these last week. One absurd consequence would be, just as there are many parts, there should be many cars. Because an inherently existing car means a car that is independent, standalone, autonomous, not depending on anything else for its existence. So if that kind of car did exist and it's one with its parts, then the car and the parts have to be absolutely one. Absolutely one. No difference at all between the car and the parts. So if that was the case, you'd have this consequence that there should be as many cars as there are parts. So if you have 1,000 parts, then you'd have 1,000 cars. That would be very expensive to buy 1,000 Mercedes-Benz. Even one is expensive, but 1,000 would be very expensive. And then you have to get them all registered. You have to get insurance for all of them. Wow, that would just be amazing. You have to be a billionaire to afford that. Or if you say, no, there's only one car. I only have to get insurance for one car. Well, if there's only one car, and if that one car is inherently one with parts, then there could be only one part. You wouldn't be able to disassemble the car. There'd just be one monolithic, partless thing that is the car. And that would be difficult, because then if something, if it breaks down, you'd have to get rid of the whole car. You couldn't just replace that one part, fix that one part, because it wouldn't be just one part. It would be the whole car that has broken down, and you'd have to just get rid of it. So those are absurd consequences that would occur if we were to say that the car, inherently existing car, was one with its parts. And the other possibility is it's separate or different from its parts. So again, we're talking about an inherently existing car, and an inherently existing car doesn't depend on anything for its existence. And so if it was separate from its parts, then it could exist completely independent of its parts. And so some absurd consequences well, there's just one here. You could sell all the parts and still have the car, because the car is independent of the parts. So you can sell the parts, make a lot of money selling all the parts of the car, and you still have the car. You can still drive around in your nice Mercedes. Or the other way would be to sell the car, but and you still have the parts. So then you can put the parts back together and still have your Mercedes. Or the parts of the car could be damaged or even destroyed, smashed, but you'd still have a car, totally perfect, intact, undamaged car, because the car exists separate from its parts, different from its parts, independent of its parts. So these ideas may sound kind of absurd, but they are. Because they follow from thinking that there is an inherently existing car, and a car that's existing all on its own, autonomously, independent of everything else. So if that was the case, then you'd have these absurd consequences. So it kind of makes you think. It's sort of, like a shock technique to make you think, huh? And then the third one, this is probably what we would normally think. We would say, no, the car is not any one of the parts, and it's not separate from its parts, obviously not, but it's the collection of the parts. All those parts together make the car. So Chandrakirti, in his commentary to Nagarjuna's Fundamental Wisdom, Chandrakirti's text is called Entering the Middle Way. And he talks about this in terms of a chariot, but we can use car. And so what Chandrakirti says in relation to this third idea, the collection of the parts, is, well, if the car is the collection of the parts, then you could find the car in a pile of disassembled parts, just like that picture, previous picture, with all the parts disassembled and laid out on the ground or just piled up in a heap. Yeah. So you would be able to find a car there, and you could get into the car and drive it away, go to work, go to supermarket or whatever. So is that possible? All the parts are there. Can you say, oh, all the collection of the parts, all the parts collected together, that is the car? Well, there you have all the parts. They're all there. So where's the car? Go back to the next slide. Yeah. And also the last bullet point, this is a little tricky, says if the car isn't in a pile of parts, so when you have all the parts disassembled and spread out or piled up in a heap, and if you say, oh, there's no car there, I can't find a car there, then also you can't say those parts are car parts. Because to be a car part, part of a car, you have to have a car. So if there's no car, you also don't have car parts. So that's another absurd consequence. So these usually take time to think about. It took me a long time to make sense of these, but they are helpful. They are helpful to dismantle, disassemble our notion of things existing inherently. So here we're using the example of a car, but you could use it with a phone, a computer, a body, your body, somebody else's body, a tree, and so on. So any object can be used with this kind of analysis to check if it exists in the real, solid, inherently independently existing way that it appears. So there's one more slide, and that is So how, is there a car? Does this whole thing mean there is no car? So when we cannot find the inherently existing car in any of those ways, does this mean there is no car? No, because a car is something that we can use. We can buy them and sell them. We can drive them, go places, do things, take our friends and so on. So there is a car that functions, can be very useful in our life. So this kind of analysis just means that there's no inherently or independently existing car. Also the parts of the car, okay? So they also don't exist inherently or independently. There's no inherently existing wheel or tire or window or door or seat or radio or, whatever you have in your car. They just don't exist inherently independently. So the third bullet point says the car and its parts do exist conventionally, meaning the car is merely labeled, merely designated independence on its parts. And the parts also are merely labeled on their parts because they too have parts. They consist of parts down to, tiny little molecules and atoms and subatomic particles. Okay, so parts are also not inherently independently existing, but they are just labeled on their parts. So this is how a car or anything, also ourself, our I, or any person, this is how things exist conventionally. But it said that to really understand conventional existence, we have to first understand emptiness. So it seems like emptiness is easier to understand than conventional existence. How things exist conventionally, how they are merely labeled. I mean, we can get some understanding of that. We can get, some intellectual, conceptual understanding of how things are just labeled in dependence on their parts. But to really understand that, to really experience that, you say we first have to realize emptiness, because when we realize emptiness, we are clearing away the wrong view, perception of things as being inherently existing, not merely labeled. So that's like always there. Whenever we see something, it always appears not merely labeled, but inherently, independently existing. And so that makes it very difficult for us to understand that things are not inherently existing, but they are merely labeled, and that's their conventional way of existence. So to understand that conventional way of existence, we have to first realize emptiness to fully understand that. So it's not easy, it takes time. And the last bullet point says, a conventionally existent car can be used to go places, be bought, sold, and so on. In short, it can function. It is able to perform a function. So the same applies to everything else, whatever there is, material things, persons, mind, different aspects of the mind, even enlightenment, nirvana, even emptiness itself. Sometimes people make the mistake and think that, okay, everything else is empty of existing inherently, but emptiness itself, that is the real thing. That is absolutely existing, inherently existing. So even some great scholars and great masters of the past made that mistake. And some other scholars say, no, you got it wrong. Even emptiness is also just merely labeled. not independently, inherently existing. That's more subtle, more difficult to understand. But the point is, absolutely everything, whatever there is, whatever exists, is empty of inherent existence. It has emptiness as its true nature, its real mode of existence. Okay, so we've had just a short time, 5 sessions, to look at this very difficult topic. It's not nearly enough. We need much more time. So I do hope that you will continue finding ways to learn more about emptiness and contemplate it and meditate on it. And I made a list of some books, different sized books, small, medium, and large, depending on your interest and time and ability to understand. So that should be available on the Thupten Norberling website, the materials page. So if you do want to go further in your understanding of emptiness, those are some books you can read. But yeah, continue looking for teachings, courses, materials, opportunities to learn more about emptiness. It is very worthwhile, very important topic. So there's a little bit of time left. If anyone would like to ask a question. Barbara, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you for the teachings, Venerable. You had talked about the fact that there are 3 types of phenomena.
Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention the third one.
The third one, yeah.
Third one, yeah. Yeah, the third one is called very hidden. Very hidden phenomena. And those are things that we can neither directly perceive, nor can we understand them by using logic or reasoning. So examples of that would be the subtle details of karma. So like the Buddha taught karma, and he said things like, if you practice giving, the result will be having wealth. You'll be wealthy in the future as a result of giving. So that's not something we can directly perceive. We can't see the future. And it's also not something we can understand logically by reasoning. And so how do we understand it? How do we come to have certainty about that? It's by relying on authority. In this case, the Buddha. So the Buddha, we regard the Buddha as an authority because his mind is enlightened and he can see everything. He can see past, present, and future. He can see all the subtle details of karma. And so he's somebody we can rely upon in this case and, accept it must be true. But this isn't blind faith or blind belief, because it said we should still investigate the Buddha's teachings. And it's kind of a long process, but I'll just try to summarize it. We check other things that the Buddha taught and see if we can verify those. And so some of the things that the Buddha taught, we may be able to verify just with our direct perception, just, seeing that they are true. I can't think of an example right now, but the existence of Bodh Gaya, maybe, the place where the Buddha became enlightened, that is a real place. You can go there. You can see it for yourself. You can sit under the Bodhi tree where the Buddha sat. So that may be one example of something we can verify with our direct perception. And then other things that the Buddha talked about are hidden phenomena, such as emptiness. And so that we can't verify with our direct perception, but we can use reasoning to check if it's true or not. And if we do go through that process of reasoning, then we can come to certainty that, oh yes, what the Buddha said is true, that things are empty of inherent existence. So in other words, we use either direct perception or we use logic and inference to be able to investigate other things that the Buddha taught. And if those turn out to be true, then we can have trust that the Buddha knew what he was talking about. And so when it comes to things he talked about that we can't directly perceive or use logic and inference to check, then we can be pretty sure that those are correct as well. He was right about these other things, so he's probably right about this too. Okay, so they say that is the way in which we can verify or which we can access extremely hidden phenomena. I'm wondering about, oh yeah, there's another example. That's right, another example. I heard this one from Geshe-ma Khalsang Wangmo. The date of our birth. I think we all, if we're asked, what is your birth date? We're able to answer that. But how do we know that was really the day we were born? Do we remember? When we popped out of the womb, did we know that was March 11, 1952? Probably not. So how do we know the date of our birth? It's not something we can perceive directly with our perceptions, with our senses. And it's also not something we can prove logically using inference. So how we know it is that we rely on an authority. So who's an authority? Our mom, our mother, and our father, and also the hospital where we were born. Because when you're born in a hospital, they always give you a certificate, birth certificate, signed and stamped and dated. And so that's like the proof. This is the proof that I was born on that date. Okay, so we rely on others who are who have authority, who have correct understanding about that in order to know that kind of phenomena. So I think that's another example of a very hidden phenomena, our birth date. We have to rely on others to know that. That makes sense. And in fact, so much of our knowledge, so much of what we know is like that. We rely on CNN or BBC or Fox News, or our teachers in school. Yeah. All the knowledge, so much of the knowledge we have are things that we haven't perceived directly ourselves. And we also haven't gone through a process of reasoning, logic and reasoning, and gained an inferential realization of that. But we rely on others. My teacher said so. CNN said so. The president said so. Unfortunately, there's so much disinformation running around these days. It's difficult to know. To know for sure. We just try to rely on those sources of information that seem reliable, that seem ethical, and so on. Yeah, so those are the three types of phenomena, three types of things that we can know and how we come to know them. It's really, Buddhism is amazing. So Buddhist philosophy. So that explanation actually comes in Lorik, or the teaching on mind and mental factors. I think Venerable George has been teaching that at Thupten Normal Ling. So if you missed out on those teachings, they're probably still available. It's a really helpful topic to understand, because also, we're talking about understanding emptiness, So it's important for us to know how we come to that understanding of emptiness. What kind of mind, kind of mental state is it that understands emptiness? Because that's what we want to develop in our own mind. We want to develop that mind that understands emptiness. So it's important to know something about that mind and how it comes about. And also to know the kind of minds we have that don't understand emptiness and that see things in a mistaken way. So the topic of mind, all the different types of mind and mental factors and so on is one that's really, really important and helpful to understand emptiness. Okay, so we come to the end of our time, and I hope this course has been helpful for you. Thank you for joining and giving me the chance to talk about. I love emptiness, so it's helpful for me to talk about it, increase my understanding. So let's conclude by making a dedication of the positive energy, merit we've accumulated this time, and also the whole course. Let's dedicate it to all sentient beings, wishing them to be free of suffering, to have happiness, and finally reach enlightenment. Sorry, waiting for the prayers to come up on the screen.
One moment, sorry.
Well, we can, oh, here they come. Okay. So due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel, bodhicitta, that has not arisen, arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And let's also pray for the long lives of our spiritual teachers, all spiritual teachers, but here we're mainly praying for the Dalai Lama and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Thanks to everyone at Thupten Norba Ling for organizing this and hosting it.
Thank you, Venerable.